the worst deal in history. That is what the people closest to the 2026 World Cup call it. Not angry fans on social media, not rival sports leagues. The people inside the planning process. The officials who sat in the rooms where the contracts were signed. The ones who read every page, understood every clause, and watched in real time as a tournament that was supposed to be the greatest celebration football had ever seen turned into something else entirely. They used that phrase privately, in conversations with journalists who kept asking the same question: how did this happen? How did a World Cup that FIFA promised would generate $13 billion, attract 500 million ticket requests, and unite the globe around the beautiful game arrive at its opening week with cancelled fan festivals, empty seats, legal subpoenas, and host cities pitching sponsorship deals to local dry cleaners because FIFA had locked up every other commercial partner? How did the most ambitious World Cup in history become, in the words of the people who built it, the worst deal in history? The answer is not simple, but it is clear. And with 3 days until the opening match in Mexico City, it is worth looking at directly. Not through FIFA's promotional material, but through the contracts, the funding disputes, the legal investigations, and the private assessments of the people who know exactly what went wrong. Because the story of the 2026 World Cup is not the story of a tournament that collapsed. The football will happen. The moments will arrive. The Estadio Azteca will be full on June 11th, and the noise of 83,000 people will be extraordinary regardless of everything that follows. But the story of how this tournament was built, the structural decisions that shaped it, the commercial model that funded it, and the trail of consequences that will outlast the trophy lift in New Jersey on July 19th. That story is still being written, and it begins with a fundamental change that FIFA made to how it runs the World Cup. In previous tournaments, local organizing committees, bodies embedded in the host country with real institutional knowledge, took on operational responsibilities in exchange for meaningful participation in commercial outcomes. That model had flaws, but it shared both the risks and the rewards. For 2026, FIFA changed everything. The governing body established its own wholly owned offices in the host countries, operating out of Miami, and took direct control of ticket sales, broadcast arrangements, sponsorship contracts, hospitality packages, and official merchandise. All of the revenue flows through FIFA, all of it. What flows to the host cities is the cost, security at venues, emergency services, transport infrastructure, stadium retrofitting, fan festivals, which are not optional extras but contractual requirements. All of that falls on the 11 American host cities and the local government authorities that back them. Cities and states pay those expenses up front, often waiting months for federal reimbursements that in several cases never arrived. FIFA, by contrast, retains everything: ticket revenue, global sponsorships, hospitality sales, broadcast income, projected to surpass $11 billion. As one economist who has studied major sporting events for decades put it directly, the host cities receive essentially zero revenues directly from the tournament, leaving them to recover their costs through tourism spending. With significant security expenses to cover and no direct revenue share, many are likely to incur losses. The practical consequences have been extraordinary. The 11 American host cities are facing a collective shortfall estimated at a minimum of $250 million. Not theoretical losses based on optimistic projections that didn't materialize. A documented, calculated gap between the costs they committed to absorb and the revenues available to meet them. In Boston, the host committee forecast revenue of $170 million. It raised $20 million. The gap was $150 million in a single city. Why? Because FIFA's own commercial exclusivity arrangements, contracts with primary sponsors that prevent host cities from doing deals with any brand operating in a similar category, meant the local sponsorship landscape was drastically narrower than anyone had anticipated. The description that circulated among private sources close to multiple host committees was specific and revealing. Cities that had run out of commercially viable partners were making pitches for sponsorship to local dry cleaners and mechanics. Not multinational brands, not regional corporations, local dry cleaners and mechanics, because FIFA's own sponsorship contracts had shut the door on everything above that level. That is the practical consequence in American host cities of a commercial model designed to maximize the governing body's own revenue, while leaving operational costs with the people on the ground. The model didn't just create a funding gap, it created a structural uncertainty that reverberated through the planning process in ways still being felt. When host cities don't have the revenue certainty they were promised, they make conservative decisions about spending. Fan festivals get scaled back or canceled. Security arrangements are delayed. Staffing plans are adjusted. Each of those conservative decisions produces a visible consequence. The New Jersey Fan Festival for the full tournament, canceled. Seattle's 74-acre fan campus, reduced to 4 smaller locations. The Foxborough entertainment license, withheld for weeks because a small town of 18,000 people was still waiting for $7.5 million of federal security money that the governing body's contractual structure had made necessary, but hadn't arranged to deliver. And then there is the legal dimension, which is unlike anything the World Cup has previously had to navigate. The Attorneys General of New York and New Jersey issued formal subpoenas to FIFA demanding internal documents about ticketing practices, seat map changes, dynamic pricing, and inventory management. The Attorney General of California wrote separately seeking answers about consumer protection law compliance. The City Council in Arlington, Texas, heard a presentation revealing that between 350,000 and 490,000 tickets for matches at the Dallas Stadium were still unsold at the point of that report. On the resale market, dynamic pricing, introduced for the first time in a World Cup, produced visible chaos. Prices for certain fixtures dropped below $100. Analyses showed an average price increase of around 34% between the opening of sales and the weeks before the tournament. And then, without explanation, tens of thousands of tickets visible on the governing body's official platform disappeared from public view, dropping from around 74,000 to under 30,000 in a brief period, with no statement from FIFA about why. Analysts who track major sporting event inventory said clearly that no plausible scenario existed in which those tickets had been purchased by fans in that time frame. The governing body's response to each of these challenges followed a pattern that has characterized its communications throughout this tournament's preparation: general statements, affirmations of commitment, references to its human rights framework, and, where specific questions were asked about specific decisions, a consistent absence of specific answers. When the attorneys general subpoenaed FIFA for ticketing documents, the organization did not volunteer additional transparency. When analysts flagged the sudden disappearance of inventory, FIFA offered no explanation. When the Foxborough Town Board threatened to withhold the entertainment license for 7 World Cup matches because no one had delivered the security money that was owed, FIFA's response was to ensure the federal funding arrived at the last minute, through mechanisms it should have secured years earlier. The bigger issue is what this pattern of behavior, centralize control, maximize revenue, deflect responsibility, respond to crisis at the last possible moment, has produced in the relationships between FIFA and the people who actually love football. The governing body's human rights obligations are formally embedded in its statutes and in the contracts signed with host cities. A report published just days ago noted that all but one host city committee had either failed to produce the required human rights action plans or produced plans that failed to adequately address the risks. All but 1 out of 11 American host cities. Those plans are not optional, they are contractual requirements, and the failure to produce them adequately, in the tournament that FIFA described as the most inclusive in history, represents a gap between institutional language and institutional practice that is now documented in formal reports by organizations whose credibility is beyond question. Amnesty International described the situation in the primary host country as an acute human rights crisis. A coalition of over 120 civil society organizations issued a formal travel advisory warning international visitors of serious risks. Established LGBTQ supporter organizations in England and Germany announced they would not bring visible presences to the American matches. 4 qualifying nations have supporters who cannot attend matches in the United States due to travel restrictions. South Africa's opening match team was stranded on a runway in Johannesburg 11 days before their fixture because visas hadn't been processed. Iran's squad is sleeping in Mexico and crossing a border on match days, and through all of it, FIFA's public position has remained consistent. The tournament will be a great success. Everyone is welcome. 500 million ticket requests. A tournament of 1,000 years. The governing body's revenue projections will be met. The commercial model will deliver what it was designed to deliver. These things are all probably true, and they are all completely irrelevant to the experience of the father in Alabama, who looked at the cost of taking his 4 children to see the host nation play, and concluded he couldn't afford it. To the supporter from Senegal who asked why their country qualified if their fans couldn't follow them. To the host city official whose committee forecast $170 million in revenue and raised $20 million. To the town board in Foxborough that nearly withheld the entertainment license for 7 World Cup matches because no one had delivered the security money that was owed. The worst deal in history. That phrase does not come from supporters angry about ticket prices. It comes from people who read the contracts, understood the model, and reached a professional conclusion about whether it was designed to serve the tournament or the governing body. The answer they reached is the one that the word worst reflects. FIFA's centralization of the World Cup's commercial model is not something that happened by accident. It is the product of a deliberate institutional strategy, one that accelerated after the 2015 corruption crisis that engulfed the governing body, and that was justified internally as a way of maintaining greater oversight and accountability over the tournament's operations. The argument was that local organizing committees had created too much complexity, too many intermediaries, too many opportunities for the kind of arrangements that had brought federal investigators to Zurich. Bringing everything in-house was presented as a governance improvement. What the 2026 experience suggests is that the governance improvement came with structural costs that were not adequately considered. When FIFA controls everything, revenue, operations, commercial relationships, it is also responsible for everything. The fan festival that was cancelled is FIFA's festival. The security funding that arrived late was money FIFA's contractual model made necessary. The inventory that disappeared without explanation is FIFA's inventory. The seat maps that changed after tickets were sold are FIFA's seat maps. The model that was designed to protect the governing body from the kind of accountability failures of the past has placed it directly in the line of accountability for a new set of failures. Ones that state attorneys general and federal courts are now examining. What happens next is genuinely uncertain. The legal investigations will continue beyond the tournament. The attorneys general of New York and New Jersey did not issue subpoenas to abandon them when the football started. The findings of those investigations about dynamic pricing, seat map changes, inventory management, and consumer protection law will produce outcomes that matter for how FIFA runs the next World Cup and the one after that. The host city cost model has already generated enough private anger that sources close to multiple federations have described the 2026 arrangement as one that nobody would be likely to repeat, specifically referencing the Women's World Cup in 2031, which the United States is also due to co-host. Whether FIFA adjusts the model in response to what 2026 has demonstrated, or whether the commercial revenues are sufficient to make the institutional case for maintaining it, is the question that will be answered not on the pitch in New Jersey on the 19th of July, but in the conversations that begin almost immediately afterwards. Because the next World Cup cycle starts before the trophy has cooled, and the people who signed the deals that produced this tournament will be asked by a new generation of host city officials whether the numbers actually worked. The answer they will have to give: collective shortfalls, canceled festivals, withheld licenses, and pitches to local dry cleaners will shape what comes next. For now, the football is 3 days away. The matches will happen. The moments will arrive. Players who have spent their professional lives preparing for exactly this tournament will walk out onto pitches in Mexico City and Toronto and Los Angeles and produce the kind of football that makes this competition irreplaceable. The Estadio Azteca on the 11th of June will be everything it was always going to be. The noise of 83,000 people in a stadium where Pelé played and Maradona scored the goal of the century will be real and extraordinary, regardless of every contract dispute, funding shortfall, and legal subpoena that preceded it. But the story of how this tournament was built, the structural decisions that shaped it, the model that funded it, the gaps between what was promised and what was delivered, that story does not end when the opening whistle blows. It continues in the courts, in the council chambers of 11 American cities, in the boardrooms of national federations who read the contracts and use the phrase, worst deal in history, and in the experience of millions of supporters for whom the 2026 World Cup was simultaneously the biggest and most complicated football tournament they had ever tried to attend. If you found this worth your time, a like helps more than you think. Subscribe if you enjoy thoughtful football coverage, and let me know your view in the comments. I read everyone. This story is still developing, and as always, football never stays quiet for long. See you in the next one.